Lord Fabio Ochoa Vasquez of the Medellín cartel was released from a U.S. prison Tuesday after serving 25 years. He's expected to be deported back to his home country of Colombia. The 67-year-old, along with his two brothers, became billionaires in the 1980s while running a coke distribution operation out of Miami.
Two infamous cartel kingpins facing very different realities right now. One, a Colombian Druglord and key operator of the Medellín cocaine cartel, now released from a U.S. prison after a quarter-century.
Trafficking, assassinations, cold-blooded murder. Fabio Ochoa, one of the most infamous lords in history, is back. In this video, we'll uncover how the Medellín cartel kingpin walked free and the chaos his return is about to unleash on Colombia. What you're about to hear and see is graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
He was also a former associate of notorious Colombian Lord Pablo Escobar. Ochoa was originally named in an indictment in the U.S. for the 1986 murder of Barry Seal, a drug smuggling pilot for the Medellín cartel, who became a DEA informant.
December 3, 2024, Fabio Ochoa Vasquez, one of the most infamous lords in history, walked out of a U.S. federal prison after serving 25 years of his 30-year sentence. A man who once helped flood the streets of America with coke, murder thousands of people, and bring Colombia to its knees, is now free. And if you think that's the end of the story, you're wrong. This is just the beginning. By the time Ochoa boards a deportation flight back to Colombia, weeks later, the whispers of his return have already reached the streets. Rival cartels, politicians, law enforcement, and old enemies all know what's coming. Chaos. Colombia isn't ready for Fabio Ochoa to come back, and neither is Fabio ready for what's waiting for him. But to understand why his release has shaken Colombia to its core, we need to go back to the start.
Fabio Ochoa is considered by many as a godfather of the business, and although most cartel members refuse to comment about the source of their wealth or were unavailable, at a horse auction in the hills outside of Medellín, Ochoa agreed to an interview with close-up correspondent William Sherman.
Some intelligence officials charge that you and the members of your family are some of the biggest cocaine traffickers in the world.
Yo no sé de que hablen mentiras y cosas.
I know nothing of lies being told. This doesn't interest me. I am well known by all the horse breeders in the world.
Fabio Ochoa Vasquez wasn't just any trafficker. Born on May 2, 1957, he was the youngest of the Ochoa brothers, Juan David, Jorge Luis, and Fabio, who co-founded the Medellín cartel alongside Pablo Escobar. This cartel wasn't a gang, it was a coke empire that, at its peak in the 1980s, controlled 80% of the global cocaine trade. Fabio's role in the cartel was key. He managed the smuggling of thousands of pounds of cocaine into the United States. Living in Miami during the late 1970s and early 1980s, he operated one of the cartel's biggest cocaine distribution centers. With his sharp business mind and family connections, Fabio made the Medellín cartel billions of dollars. In 1987, Forbes magazine named Fabio and his brothers among the world's billionaires, but their wealth was built on blood and terror. The Medellín cartel didn't just sell drugs, it silenced anyone who got in their way. Politicians, judges, journalists, even innocent civilians, no one was safe.
The bosses who run the Medellín cocaine cartel in Colombia. The man the bosses wanted dead was the former Minister of Justice of Colombia, who lived here and who had been sent to this Soviet bloc country as ambassador for his own safety after the bosses had marked him for death in Colombia. But even here, thousands of miles from Colombia, in a police state, the bosses set out to prove that anyone who gets in their way will be killed.
Fabio's crimes went far beyond trafficking. In 1986, Barry Seal, a pilot who had smuggled drugs for the Medellín cartel, was violently assassinated in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Barry had turned informant for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) and was helping expose the cartel's operations. Fabio Ochoa Vasquez was named in U.S. indictments for his alleged involvement in Barry's murder, a hit that sent shockwaves through the DEA. Barry's wasn't just about silencing a traitor, it was a brutal reminder that the cartel's reach extended far beyond Colombia.
He used to smuggle drugs, and he got caught, and he became one of the government's most valuable informants in the war against cocaine. But last night in Louisiana, Barry Seal's enemies caught up with him and killed them. Tonight, 3 men are in custody. NBC's Brian Ross reports that Seal was about to testify for the government once again.
Authorities believe last night's machine gun killing of top drug informant Barry Seal was ordered by bosses in Medellín, Colombia, who sent 5 men to Baton Rouge to kill Seal.
By the late 1980s, the Colombian government was under intense pressure to take down the Medellín cartel. Escobar and the Ochoa brothers were declared enemies of the state, and the U.S. demanded their extradition. But extradition was the one thing the cartel feared most. In 1990, Fabio and his brothers decided to make a deal. They surrendered to Colombian authorities under a special law introduced by then-President Cesar Gaviria. This law promised smaller sentences and immunity from extradition for criminals who turned themselves in, confessed their crimes, and cooperated with the government. For the Ochoa brothers, it was a calculated move. Fabio served just 6 years in a Colombian prison and was released in 1996. At the time, the Ochoa brothers believed they were safe, but they were wrong. Freedom didn't last long for Fabio. In 1999, Colombian authorities launched Operation Millennium, a sweeping crackdown on drug lords. Fabio was arrested again, along with dozens of other traffickers, and accused of continuing to take part in cocaine shipments. This time, there would be no deals, no immunity. In 2001, Fabio was extradited to the United States, something he and the Medellín cartel had fought against for years. It was a crushing blow. The man who had once commanded armies of assassins and managed billions in drug money was now shackled and facing trial in Miami. In 2003, Fabio was convicted of trafficking and conspiracy to distribute cocaine. He was sentenced to 30 years in a U.S. federal prison. Now, decades later, Fabio Ochoa is free. On December 23, 2024, he arrived at Bogotá's El Dorado International Airport on a deportation flight, but he no longer looks like the kingpin he was in the 1980s. Wearing a gray sweatshirt and carrying his belongings in a plastic bag, Fabio looked like any other deportee, but everyone watching knew who he was. Immigration officials in bulletproof vests escorted him to a desk where his fingerprints were checked against a database. The results confirm what many feared. Fabio isn't wanted for any current charges in Colombia. His past crimes, as horrifying as they were, had been wiped clean by time and legal loopholes. Within hours, Fabio was released. Photos of him reuniting with his family flood social media, sparking outrage across Colombia. Survivors of the Medellín cartel's bloody reign, the families of judges, journalists, and police officers murdered by the cartel are left terrified.
Ochoa was at the heart of the cocaine boom in the 1980s, fueling the U.S. drug epidemic from his Miami operations. Ochoa's empire wasn't just vast, it was deadly. Authorities linked them to over 40 tons of coke shipments, while his Miami base became a central hub for the Medellín's cartel's operations. But it wasn't just drugs. Ochoa was also indicted for his alleged role in the murder of DA informant Barry Seal, a chilling reminder of how far cartel leaders often go to protect their operations. Ochoa is expected to return to Colombia with vast resources, Natasha.
Fabio Ochoa Vázquez's return to Colombia has done more than just revive old memories. It's reopened wounds. The Medellín cartel wasn't just a drug empire. It was a machine of terror, fueled by cocaine money and built on rivers of blood. Fabio and his brothers were key players, working alongside Pablo Escobar to turn Colombia into a battlefield. From 1976 to 1993, the Medellín cartel dominated the global cocaine trade, smuggling tons of drugs into the United States, Canada, and Europe. But it wasn't just about drugs. It was about power. The cartel's leaders were untouchable, controlling vast territories and running their operations with military precision. But their empire came at a horrifying cost. The cartel is estimated to have killed more than 3,500 people, including over 500 police officers, judges, journalists, politicians. Anyone who stood in their way were hunted down and murdered. Take, for example, Rodrigo Lara, Colombia's Minister of Justice. In 1984, 2 gunmen on motorcycles ambushed his car on a Bogotá highway, riddling it with bullets. His crime? Speaking out against the cartel's influence. Or Luis Carlos Galán, a presidential candidate, assassinated in 1989 during a public rally. These killings weren't just about silencing critics, they were messages. By the late 1980s, the Medellín cartel wasn't just fighting rival cartels, it was fighting Colombia itself. Pablo Escobar and his associates declared war on extradition, targeting anyone who supported handing drug traffickers over to the United States. The cartel's campaign of terror included bombings, kidnappings, and assassinations. In 1989, a bomb ripped through the DAS, Colombian Intelligence Agency building, killing 52 civilians. millions. That same year, Escobar ordered the bombing of an Avianca passenger plane, killing 107 people just to a single informant. Fabio Ochoa may not have been in the spotlight like Escobar, but he was a key part of the operation. The Ochoa brothers provided the resources, the networks, and the expertise that made the cartel's crimes possible. In the early 1990s, the Medellín cartel began to crumble. Escobar's death in 1993 at the hands of Colombian police and U.S. Special Forces marked the end of an era. The cartel's lieutenants were either killed or captured, and the Ochoa brothers' deal with the Colombian government kept them out of U.S. prisons, at least temporarily. But the violence didn't stop. The Medellín cartel's fall left a power vacuum, and smaller, more ruthless groups rose to take its place. Cartels like Cali and Norte del Valle fought vicious battles for control, while smaller groups moved in to claim their share of the drug trade. Now, Fabio Ochoa is back in Colombia, and his release has thrown the balance of power into chaos. Modern cartels like Clan del Golfo and Los Caparros have little loyalty to the old Medellín leadership. To them, Fabio is a threat. What makes Fabio dangerous isn't just his name, it's his fortune. U.S. prosecutors have admitted they were never able to seize all of the Ochoa family's illicit wealth. Millions, maybe billions of dollars remain hidden, stashed away in offshore accounts, shell companies, and businesses in Colombia. For rival cartels, that money is a prize worth killing for.
He was arrested again in 1999 alongside other drug lords and extradited to the U.S. in 2001. In 2003, he was convicted of drug trafficking and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Now that Ochoa is back in Colombia, victims of Medellín cartel crimes are voicing concerns about him being a free man.
Today's drug trade is nothing like the Medellín cartel of the 1980s. Modern cartels are separated, operating more like multinational corporations than old-school mafia families. Groups like Clan del Golfo, the largest cartel in Colombia, control entire territories with private armies and state-of-the-art networks. Unlike Medellín, these cartels avoid the spotlight. They don't plant bombs in public or assassinate presidential candidates. Instead, they rely on bribery, intimidation, and strategic violence to maintain control. But that doesn't mean they're less dangerous. In fact, they're deadlier. The Clan del Golfo has been locked in a brutal war with rival groups like Los Caparros and Las Águilas Negras, leaving a trail of death across Colombia's countryside. Fabio's return has the potential to tip this delicate balance, reigniting old rivalries and sparking new conflicts. But that's not all. Fabio's release has also reignited calls for justice from the families of his victims. Colombian journalist Guillermo Cano Izaza, who publicly exposed Escobar's crimes, was assassinated in 1986. Supreme Court Justice Hernando Baquero Borda, who defended the extradition treaty, was also killed that same year. Fabio may not have pulled the trigger, but his hands were far from clean, and yet he walks free. For victims' families, it's a bitter pill to swallow, but for Fabio, it's an opportunity.
¿Arrepentió lo que pasó, lo que hizo?
No, porque yo no lo hice pensando en hacer mal.
¿Qué hizo usted? ¿Por qué se lo extraditaron?
Por este caso, nada. Por este caso no soy culpable. Me lo montaron. Me lo montaron. Yo en el pasado me sometí a la justicia. Entonces es mi delito.
¿Qué le montaron?
¿No ha salido?
No ha salido.
Muchas gracias. Dios lo bendiga. Bienvenido.
With Fabio's return, rival cartels are already plotting their next moves, and Fabio's hidden fortune makes him a target. His name alone carries weight in the cartel, and it's only a matter of time before someone decides to take him out or use him to their advantage. Reports suggest that Fabio is lying low, staying with family in Bogotá. But in Colombia's violent underworld, no one stays hidden for long. Chaos is coming. Fabio's release has reminded Colombia and the world that the drug war is far from over. What comes next? Only time will tell. So, what do you think will happen next? Will Fabio rise again, or will his past finally catch up to him? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video.